This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Hello, world, and welcome to episode 203 of a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda, and today's sponsor is Private Internet Access. If you've ever surfed the web and wanted to do it securely, especially when you're traveling or using someone else's network, you definitely need private internet access. Private internet access allows you to have a secure VPN without them logging what data what you're doing, what transactions you're making, or anything like that, to connect to anywhere in the world. You can also change your default location so it appears as if you're coming from a different place. Why is this helpful, you say? If you're not doing anything nefarious, well, it's really helpful if you want to test DNS resolution from different places and different time zones. It's a really cool tool, and it's not very expensive at all. You can get plans starting at $3.99 a month, and you can find out more by going to ageekleader.com/VPN. Again, that's ageekleader.com/VPN. All right, Geek Leaders. Today on the show, I have Meredith Bell. She's a co-founder and president of Performance Support Systems and the host of the Strong for Performance podcast, and the author of a book that I've got in front of me called Connect with Your Team, Mastering the Top 10 Communication Skills. Meredith, welcome to the show.
Thank you, John. I'm delighted to be here with you and excited about our conversation.
If you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about kind of what you do and how you got to where you are now in your career, just so we have some context for our conversation.
Sure. I am the co-founder and president of a software company. So your listeners will enjoy hearing that, although I am not the geek in our company. I've worked with my two business partners for 30 years. So that's kind of a remarkable thing these days. And we each have our own special talents. And you can imagine over the years, we've kind of come to realize and appreciate those individual strengths that we each have. Originally, I was a solo consultant and worked with companies on the same topics I'm passionate about today, which is communication skills, leadership development, team building. And I met one of my partners, Denny Coates, just about 31 years ago. And he and I started collaborating on some projects together and decided we were compatible where it counts in terms of values and interests. And we put our two solo practices together and brought in a third person at that same time to manage the other aspects of the business. And so for a number of years, we continued doing that kind of consulting and training. And then we looked for a 360-degree feedback tool to use. And back in the early 90s, that was not a common thing. There weren't very many, and they were very expensive and not customizable. So we decided we would create our own, hired Denny's son, who was a software developer, and introduced a product called 2020 Insight back in 1994. And that program, of course, it's gone through a number of revisions, as you can imagine, but it's still going strong and provides wonderful feedback for, individuals, teams, and organizations. And that's really our specialty, helping people find out what is it they are strong in, where is it that they need to make improvements, and then we have other tools and now books that help them learn how to be more effective in performing their jobs, in particular how they interact with other people.
So you wrote a book about communication, and what inspired you to tackle that topic of communication?
Well, it's been what we've worked on really for the last 35 years. I just know that there is so much pain, unnecessary suffering a lot of times in the workplaces, in families, around people not knowing how to really connect well and communicate well with each other because we don't learn this in school. Mm-hmm. And so Denny and I just said, it was time for us to put our vast experience into a book to make it more available to more people other than folks that, work with us with our programs. So that's really the motivation behind writing the book, is getting the word out in a big way about some of these essential skills.
So do you think these skills may be becoming more rare or more sought after, I guess, with social media and less face-to-face communication and even less verbal communication, since people are writing a lot more now and, texting and messaging versus, just having those conversations?
These skills and the kinds of skills we're talking about, like listening and giving and receiving
Mhm.
feedback, are essential interpersonal skills for building strong relationships and getting the work done, right? So texting, emails, sometimes those can save time, but they don't take the place of real conversations where
Mhm.
we need to be able to, look somebody in the eye, or at least listen carefully to the tone of their voice, and, what they're conveying, other than just the words that they're, typing out for us. I think that's really key to building relationships, and especially with having to work virtually over the past, year or more for many people, having those interactions is a way of staying connected, because people have felt so isolated working from homes.
Yeah, for sure. I think, and you mentioned, the tone of your voice, vocal tonality, and also like body language and how important that is. And that's one thing I've noticed when I am working remotely is turning the camera on sometimes and having that ability to see your team, especially when you're doing like a one-on-one or something like that, is extremely important because it gives you that extra layer of information, in order to
Exactly.
communicate properly and to see if the person's smiling when they said something that may have been sarcastic or not, or to figure out that tone that they're trying to convey. And that's one of the things that I've realized when it comes to like written, like an email. The tone of the email is going to be however I read it, not necessarily how it's written. And that's kind of a
Yes.
challenge there.
That's why I always reread something before I send it, to try to imagine it from the other person's perspective. Will they get the same message I'm trying to send?
Yeah, I always try to, when I'm reading something, even if I'm in a bad mood, I'll stop and try to smile before I read it just to see like if that changes the way I feel about it. Uh, so in your book, you talk about, 10 different um, skills for communication. And one of the things that I've noticed as going through it is you have one about offering encouragement. And
Yes.
and sometimes that's difficult for me, partly because I struggle, unless I'm very intentional about it. I struggle about being empathetic sometimes with what someone's going through, and being able to offer encouragement, because some things that may be easy for me, inherently, I just feel like they're easy for everybody, and sometimes they're not. Do you have any advice for people like me that may struggle with offering encouragement?
Oh, thanks for asking about that, John, because I think you're not alone there. And a key first step is simply to notice. So you raise your awareness levels. So you pick up these little clues, or big clues, depending on, how the person is coming across to you. So you notice if they seem to be down. So for someone that's normally very upbeat, and positive, if you say, "Oh, how's your day going?" and they go, "Oh, not so good," then it's a clue for you to pause and ask, "Oh, want to talk about it?" You invite them, as opposed to making it sound like it's an inquisition, right? So that's a first step, is paying attention, so you pick up on differences of how somebody normally is compared to where they might be right now. And a key element of any of the communication skills that we've written about, is number one, listening, which is the first skill there. Because when you ask, "How are you doing?" if somebody comes back and says, "Oh, I'm fine," and if you take it at face value, you may not think to ask a follow-up question like, "Oh, well, your tone of voice would indicate that you're not so fine. So, something going on you'd like to talk about?" So, again, you invite them. So, it's making that conscious choice to pause, take a few minutes to find out what's happening with this other individual. So, genuinely being concerned about their well being. And then as you ask them, if they start responding, you continue to listen, and you're listening for, are they feeling discouraged? Are they feeling kind of down on themselves right now? And there are different ways that you can express empathy without feeling like, oh, I've got to master some, process, right?
Mhm.
So you could just simply listen. And if you're hearing them sound discouraged, just acknowledge it and say, gosh, it sounds like you're discouraged by this recent news that you've gotten, or it sounds like you're disappointed that, this particular way that you tried of doing things didn't work. Is that accurate? And so you're checking and not assuming that, oh, they're upset about this. Or a lot of times we take it personally, right? We say, oh, they're upset about me about something. It has nothing to do with you. It's something else that was going on before they encountered you. And so it's just being tuned into them. So you can ask a question or you can make a statement. Gosh, it must be discouraging to have that happen just when you were building up momentum. Another aspect of encouragement involves reminding the person of past successes, because if you've got someone that's really feeling down on themselves, some big mistake they made or some sale they lost or whatever it is that didn't go the way they hoped, and they're experiencing this disappointment, to give them balance and remind them of strengths they have that have helped them prevail in past situations. That's really important because people lose perspective when they're feeling down about something that's happened. And so if they have someone who can help them think back to times when they prevailed in a difficult situation, that can help them, get that balanced perspective again. Because a lot of times, I will just say this, many of us, start getting down on ourselves and thinking, oh, I can just never do anything right. Or, I shouldn't even be in this field. We just start making these global negative statements about ourselves. And we need someone to help us get out of that downward spiral into a more positive way of thinking. And this doesn't mean being a Pollyanna. The wrong thing to do when you want to encourage someone is say, oh, well, that's not so bad. Or I don't know why you'd be so upset over that. That's pretty small in the scheme of things.
Yeah.
Any of that kind of, platitude is not welcome by somebody who's feeling down.
Right.
And so that's where putting on that listening mindset of how can I, really be present for this person right now.
So what's the difference between like listening and hearing? Because sometimes you hear what they say, when someone is discouraged or down or whatever, but you don't necessarily listen. What's the difference between that? And how can you detect that I'm not really listening right now? I'm just hearing it.
Yeah. Oh, well, for one thing, you can hear the actual words that somebody says and register them without going a little deeper to find out, wonder what they mean by that. So if you think of hearing as being more superficial and listening is a willingness to go deeper, to really understand the message the person is trying to send, I think that's an important distinction.
Yeah, because I think sometimes people will think that they're listening when in reality they're just hearing the surface. And I think sometimes listening involves more than just auditory hearing. It involves checking out the other senses.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, when you're having a one-on-one with someone, it's really useful to have that visual piece to go by so that you can look at their facial expressions or body language. And even if you're on the phone, paying attention to tone of voice and not just, what someone is saying, the words they're saying is really important to getting the full message.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. So let's say we are trying to work on, acknowledging people, offering encouragement, and expressing appreciation as well. What are some ways we can do that and be genuine about it? Because sometimes, if you haven't expressed appreciation before and then you start all of a sudden, sometimes it seems fake. It seems like, oh, what are they thanking me for now? What's coming up? What's coming down the pipe that I'm worried about? How's the way that you can, generally make that transition and seem, and truly be genuine about what you're saying?
Yes. Well, it's so funny you said that, John, because one of the first things you could do is just let people know. Like as the leader of your team, you could just let the team know, hey, guys, and gals, I'm going to be really being more conscious of looking for opportunities to notice when you do something well. So you'll be more aware of what I'm looking for and what really good performance looks like, because sometimes I take it for granted and I don't mention it. And that way you're setting the stage for them. And you can also say, hey, and if you don't hear any positive comments from me in whatever time frame you want to give, in a week or a month, hey, let me know that, because that means I'm falling short of what I really want to do. So that's a way to set the stage of what your intention is and hold yourself accountable for doing it. And I think the other thing in noticing is, all of this goes around noticing things, right? So you become aware, you look for things that people are doing. Ken Blanchard, talked about this years ago in the 1 Minute Manager, the idea of catching people doing things right. And so when you see someone do something well, if they've completed, even a big project or some small thing that they've done, to be very specific. So say, John, you had turned in something to me, I could say, hey, John, thanks so much for getting this to me on time. I appreciate that. And I really like the way you went into detail about A, B, C. So you are very specific with the person about what it was they did, instead of saying something vague and general, like, hey, great job on this. That's sort of like an attaboy, but it doesn't give them anything specific as far as information that's useful about what you want from them in the future.
Yeah, I know. I was very intentional a while back to start thanking my team a little bit more, and I wrote out thank you cards, and I hadn't been doing a very good job of this, the way I should have. And when I did this the first time and passed out, gave some thank you cards to certain people, and I was, follow the same rules. I was specific about everything. I remember some of my responses were, "Are you quitting? What's going on? Are you dying? Are you sick?" Like, nope, just trying to do a better job of showing the appreciation, because I know it's something I'm not good at. I just overlooked that part of it. I need to do better. So that was my one way of trying to do that.
Well, what you're bringing up there is an important point, and that is consistency. So thinking of one small thing, so somebody, that's listening doesn't start feeling overwhelmed and saying, oh, well, that sounds good, but how am I going to do that in real life? Well, you do it by simply raising your awareness of what's going on. And then it doesn't take very long just to say a few words to someone about, hey, I really appreciate you doing that so well. It means a lot to me. And then giving a reason why, it saved me 30 minutes today because of the way you did this, to help them see the benefit to them, to you, and to the organization is very, inspiring and motivating to somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. I know sometimes where I'll come in and, someone did something the previous week and they did it the right way. So I don't have any negative emails or comments from the rest of the company or any other executives. It's nice to come in and go to the team and say, hey, look, you made my Monday a lot easier because I don't have to deal with this, this, and this. Thank you so much for taking care of that the right way and going above and beyond, and those little, like, 30 seconds, minute, appreciation, will probably set that person off to a trajectory of being more positive and probably even more productive that entire week.
Well, exactly. And that's one of the things, sometimes, and this is probably more true of, say, management attitudes in the past. Well, they're already getting a paycheck here. I shouldn't have to, comment on every positive thing they do. That's what they're getting paid for. Well, that's a lack of understanding about what drives human behavior, to think that people don't want to be noticed and appreciated. And you are absolutely right, John. The mileage you get from that, and I mean, it's not why you're doing it, but one of the payoffs of doing it is people feeling more valued, and it intensifies their commitment and their focus on performing well. So, there's lots of good reasons for getting good at doing that.
Right. That reminds me of Dan Pink's book, Drive, where he talked about autonomy, mastery, and purpose as motivators. And you get into that mastery. People want to be good at what they do. They want to improve upon that. And whenever you can point someone in the direction of the things that they are doing well and remind them of how good they are at certain things, it motivates them in that mastery area.
Yes. And, I want to share one other thing about appreciation that I learned from Dan Sullivan, who runs Strategic Coach. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but he had a podcast with Joe Polish, and it was called the 10X Talks. And he talked about appreciation in a way that I had not heard before, but it's very powerful. He said before he has a conversation or a meeting set up with someone, he takes a few minutes to just write out on a sheet of paper the things about that person he genuinely appreciates. And he thinks of it in terms of, we appreciate when we make an investment, let's say in the stock market, and our money increases, it appreciates. But we don't always think about appreciation in terms of the value of people or an individual appreciating. When you have thought through in advance of meeting with someone, especially if it's someone that you've had issues with in the past, and you take time to think about, okay, so what is it about this person I do value? When they walk in the room, or when you get on the phone or in a Zoom call with them, it's not that you're telling them these things that you've written down, it's that you are approaching the conversation with that attitude of appreciation, and they feel and sense that, and they respond accordingly. And typically you're able to have a really great conversation. And the benefit to them is that their appreciation of themselves in their own mind goes up. So it isn't that just you've appreciated them, they've come to appreciate themselves more. And guess what? When someone values themselves, they are going to be a stronger team player, a stronger performer. You're going to have a better relationship with them.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think that's I think it's one of the hidden gems when it comes to management. There's been other leaders that I've worked for in the past and been, managers, peers with, that have always said, "Well, I'm not doing that because that's just their job. I'm just, they're, And I like to try to do, pizza days. Like just, what was it, last Monday? We brought in pizza for everybody, and kind of just, for no occasion other than just thank you for, doing the things that you do. We appreciate you. Here's here's some pizza, and like I said before, writing thank you cards, or giving the occasional gift card out, just without any specific event, just hey, just to thank you, because I know all that you've done hasn't gone unnoticed, and here are some things that I've recognized that you did really well, and I really appreciate it.
And John, that is so important. And I think it's also critical to remember it doesn't matter what level of success somebody has attained, whether it's, their title or their financial situation. Everybody needs to be appreciated. There was a fellow that ran this marketing for entrepreneurs organization that I used to go to. I would attend the conferences, and this guy was a multimillionaire. And I remember making a point whenever I went to the conferences to go up and tell him certain things that I was really enjoying or appreciating in the conference. And one year he turned to me and said, "Meredith, could you call me every day and tell me you're always so positive? I really, he appreciated that kind of feedback." And here's somebody you think, well, he's made, he's a successful person in every way you could count, great family and all. And yet he still was eager, let's say, to get that kind of input, because most people hear way more criticism than they do positives. And so if we ask ourselves, how can I inject some, appreciation into this situation? Even if we need to give somebody constructive feedback, will do well if we balance that with recognizing the good things they have done, not just this one thing where they fell short.
So let's go into that. How do we give maybe critical feedback or constructive feedback that's kind of critical to someone, but also let them know that, hey, we're not we don't want to fire you. We just want you to get better in this area. We want to help you out because you do have value. You do bring good things to the table that we appreciate. And I've heard people say before, you need to sandwich in the critical with compliments. And every time I've tried that, it's always been like, they don't hear the negative. They only hear the two positives if I do that. What is a way we can actually communicate the thing that needs to be changed or fixed, but also let the person know that we do value them?
Okay. Well, let's think of a specific example for a minute so we kind of make it real. Let's think of someone that maybe is in a customer service role, and I'm the manager and I've observed this person and how they interacted with a customer. And the way they interacted, the customer left angry. So I need to address that, right? I don't want this employee to be doing this again. Right. So I can go over and let's just say it's you, John, and I say, hey, John, I noticed Mrs. Jones left angry. You are usually so positive and have such a great experience with our customers. This one, though, was really different because usually people leave smiling and not angry like she was today. So I'm concerned about that we may have, lost a valuable customer here. And invite the person at that point to talk about what it was that happened, because we can make assumptions again about the motivation of the person and why they did what they did. But it's a good thing to, again, listen and give them an opportunity to say, man, I had a horrible day. I was yelling at one of my kids this morning before I came in. And so I was feeling guilty. And you don't know what's going on in somebody's life. So getting them, not to get it off the hook, but to get the context of what's going on. And then state, here is what I heard. Be very specific about the behavior that was an issue to make sure the other person gets what it is that's the problem. Okay. You interrupted her 3 times and the tone of voice you used, came across as very impatient, like you really weren't interested in hearing what, she had to say. And then again, give the person a chance to say, yeah, I guess I did do that. I didn't realize it. I wanted to, and find out where they're coming from and then say, well, that approach isn't acceptable. And here's what I need you to do in the future, and get them to agree to it. So they're not just focusing on the good things that you said first. You're involving them in making a commitment to a future behavior that you will be able to evaluate. Did they do that or not the next time some situation like that happens? And so also getting them to review with you after the agreement. Okay, so just to be clear, I'd like you to, tell me in your own words, what is it you're going to do differently next time? And then express a vote of confidence. That's where that other positive thing comes in. Hey, I know based on, past things you've done that this is something you'll be able to do successfully. And so I have a lot of confidence in you. If you need any support from me, I'm here for you. So it's giving them that sense of, okay, she still believes in me, even though I screwed up this time, right? So that's an important aspect. You want them to know you're in their corner, but you did need to address this piece with them.
Yeah. So let me ask you this then. In your book, you talk about, some things that people don't like when it comes to like verbal attacks and negative things that could lower self-esteem. And sometimes when someone makes a mistake and they complain about it, those exact phrases that you put in the book not to say are things that run through my head. Like, for example, let's say someone came to me and said, "Oh, I'm double booked for meetings right now." And in my brain, I think, well, that's your fault. You shouldn't have accepted 2 meetings that were, overlapping. You should have thought about that. But what can I say instead that won't be, putting them down or negative, but might be encouraging them to correct that behavior in the future to be an improvement.
Okay, I've got it. You could say, well, where did your system break down?
That's
and
good.
what can you do to make sure that doesn't happen in the future?
Because as I'm reading through your book, I know it talked about, well, that's your own fault. It runs right through my head. Well, that's your fault. You should have done this. And to me, it seems logical that that's something I should say. But then when you back up and say, what if someone said that to me, it would probably be hurtful.
Exactly, John. You see, sometimes we think, oh, I can say this, but nobody ever better say that to me. We have this double standard. And so I think it's really important before we open our mouths, think about what's the end result I want from this. And if it's better cooperation, better performance, then I need to really think about how am I going to say this that will elicit a response and long-term behavior that's going to serve us well and serve our relationship. See, to me, a key aspect of all of this is this going to build trust with this other person, or is it going to take away trust? Mm-hmm. And trust is the foundation of strong, not just relationships, but performance, right? Absolutely. And so, you mentioned bosses you had in the past that, had certain attitudes. Well, when somebody knows that you really have their back, that you are in this to be, and the word, servant leader gets a bad rap, but the idea is, how can I serve this person in this moment that's going to be most helpful? And so sometimes serving means I'm going to be really honest with them about the impact their words or their behavior had on me. It doesn't mean, dancing around issues, but what it does mean is preserving their dignity and yours so that it's serving to benefit both of you for future behavior that you're hoping for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's, you have to think about leadership, in my opinion, from the long game. You're not just thinking about the short, let me put this person in their place and correct their behavior right now. You're thinking about how can I, grow them in the long term. And part of that, or a big part of that, probably the biggest part of that is trust, and that they can trust you to defend them, to have their back, to, shield them when necessary, and protect them so that they can grow.
And, there's a couple of things that I just thought about. And I've heard, some of your other podcasts, and I think this is a recurring theme, the word curiosity. Mm-hmm. If you can be genuinely curious as a leader, what that means is you're going to be asking more questions, and you will do less advice giving or, correcting people and that sort of thing, but ask questions to get them to think for themselves. And we actually have a couple of chapters in the book on that, because we feel that it's so important to elicit from the other person. Even kids don't like being talked down to, and adults hate it. Mm-hmm. And so why would we think it's okay to speak in a tone that sounds like we're correcting someone else? I'll never forget having to have a counseling session with one of our tech support people. This is many years ago, but we had done a survey of our customers, and a few people had written and said, hey, I hesitate to call because of the tone of voice so-and-so uses with me. So I sat down with this employee and I said, what do you make of this comment? And she said, oh, yeah, I do that on purpose. I use that tone of voice. If they've called me 2 or 3 times about the same thing, I want them to know I'm not pleased.
Oh, man.
I about fell out of my chair. I said, oh, well, let's talk about this. Because it's just an example. The tone of voice we use has a huge impact on other people. And if we want to encourage people to be honest with us, to tell us like it really is, if they're struggling or, the good, the bad, and the ugly that's going on, we've got to set the tone so that they feel safe talking to us and not feel like they're going to, pay a penalty for that. And so the way we interact with them, we have to take personal responsibility for how we approach them. And John, getting back to your struggle with what do I say, think about, is there a question I could ask in this moment that would encourage that other person to think about, why they did this? And sometimes why is the wrong question because it sounds judgmental. Well, why on earth did you think that would work?
Yeah.
We want to get at the thinking behind what they did, so they think about why they did what they did, and then analyze that to come up with a better decision the next time.
Yeah, I think I found that whenever I say why did you do that? Why are you doing it this way? It always sounds negative. I can't ask the why question very positively. So I found that what works better for me. Also, like, what's your plan for? What are you going to be doing when this happens? What's because it sounds more curious, I think, if you say what versus the why.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, just listen to what they're saying and then just add a question to dig behind it. Oh, tell me more about your thinking there. It doesn't even have to be in the form of a question.
Yeah, I think when I took a leadership class, this is probably like more than a decade ago, probably 15 years ago, and it said, well, ask the 5 whys, ask why 5 times. I'm like, well, and then I had feedback with someone, and I was talking to them. We were doing our one-on-one, and they said, yeah, it sounds like you're belittling me when you keep asking why. You got to do it a different way.
Mhm. Well, and that's really true. And what you're getting at there is it's really not good to adopt a formula that you're trying to follow like a formula.
Right.
When I share steps like for giving feedback, it needs to happen just as part of the natural conversation. So you're not thinking, okay, did I do step 2 or 3? These are human interactions where how we come across, how we state things, it needs to come from a place of genuine caring and curiosity. So that because the whole purpose of it is to learn from, learn more about where that person was coming from so we can help guide them to a better, different way if the way they did it didn't get the results they or we wanted to see.
Yep,
And
exactly.
so, just asking ourselves that question, what could I say or do here that will help them, learn from this experience and not repeat the same mistake in the future? And we've got, a chapter in the book on that, this thing of learning from experience, where we ask the person and get them to think about, okay, so what happened? Let's talk about, the sequence of the events. And this is where a why question can be useful in a curious way. Why do you think it happened that way?
hmm
Why do you think this person did that? And then, so what was the outcome? What was the consequence? Did it turn out the way you had hoped? What were you looking for versus what happened? And why do you think there was a gap there? So you're asking why in that case from a place of just encouraging the other person to think about it. And if they say, I don't know, say, well, take a couple of minutes. Anytime somebody asks us a really thought-provoking question, we don't instantly have the answer, and we need to be respectful of the quiet that's required. Sometimes most of us hate silence,
Yeah.
and we get uncomfortable with it. So if you just give yourself a minute to wait and let them think, because sometimes they're looking for you to bail them out. And especially if that's been a pattern in the past, oh, well, they don't really have to come up with the answer because you're going to jump in.
And, that goes into the listening skills too. You talk about, being a good listener. Sometimes you can be a good listener, but if you respond too quickly, people assume you're not a good listener, because you're not taking in what they're saying. You're just coming back with an answer.
Right.
So using silence and pauses effectively is extremely important when it comes to those listening skills.
Absolutely.
And one thing I liked about, I really got out of your book was in the appendix, you have 5 questions, reflection questions. And I think that those are all helpful, like especially number 4, which was, how would you handle the situation in the future? How would you do this differently? But it's a more polite way of saying, what would you, you messed this up. What would you do better? This is a much, much better way of asking that kind of question.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is good because it's getting the person to think back about, and that's where the previous questions get them thinking about, well, what did happen and what are my thoughts about why it happened that way? Because really what you're trying to get at is, how did they contribute to the situation? And if you are really listening closely, you'll pick up on whether somebody's blaming others, kind of the victim mentality, or whether they're taking ownership and responsibility for it, because that's another whole area of growth that as a leader, you can move people towards, is recognizing where are they? And it's not that you say, oh, well, that's victim mindset there, but you're hearing and listening for that to help guide them to what they might do, like you said, differently in the future. So they bridge that gap between what they did do and what they want to do. How and another one is just looking at, how were you being at the time? What was going in your mind? What feelings did you have going on? Because that can impact what we say and do. If we just came out of a previous experience that wasn't good and we go into a new one, we bring some of that baggage with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been a great conversation. How can people find out more about your podcast and your book and things that you've been working on?
Well, our website is called growstrongleaders.com. And on our homepage, we have a short video and a description of the 2 books. You and I talked about one today on Connect with Your Team. There's a second one on peer coaching made simple, so people know how to coach each other in improving these skills. My podcast is on the same website. It's one of the tabs there, and the others will give information about our products. And another thing I wanted to offer for your listeners is growstrongleaders.com/geek. They can get some free resources that we've made available. One is an ebook called Listen Like a Pro that's based on the listening chapter from our book, so they can get a taste of that. And then we also have a quiz that they can take to help them assess how well they personally connect with other team members and how well they feel other people on their team connect with each other, so they can see, where the gaps are. And then I also have my calendar link there if someone were interested in setting up a call, just to be able to learn more about what we offer and if it might be a match with what they're looking at doing within their companies.
Awesome. And I'll link all that up in the show notes at geekleader.com, as well as on our books from our guest. I'll have your book there too. Meredith, thanks so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, John. It's been great talking with you.
If you enjoyed that episode, please leave a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. I'd greatly appreciate that. And also, don't forget to check out merch. We have some t-shirts that I've designed that are on at geekleader.com. You can click on the merchandise section there and check that out. And also, don't forget about the books from our guests. So if you like this guest and other guests that have written books, please go ahead and check that out at geekleader.com. I would greatly appreciate it, and I'm sure they would too.